All right, everybody, so just like that, we have this awesome stump completely covered out with aluminum foil. Now, just be aware that I did use a little bit of hot glue along the way just to kind of get it to attach in particular ways. Because it is not a very flat surface and it's very circular and and very cylinder-like, it really doesn't allow the aluminum foil to really curve very well because we're also coming down to the actual the bottom itself. Now, I did apply just a little bit of glue to the bottoms of each four corners, and that's just going to kind of hold this down until we can get the clay around it to give it that suction down to the actual aluminum foil. The aluminum foil doesn't allow the hot glue to stick to it very well, so it's really just holding it down temporarily. And remember, the only reason we're coating it with the aluminum foil and protecting that foam is because this is going to be a reusable structure in the future. If I want to peel this off and then reconfigure it to change the way the foam is shaped in any way, then I can do that, and then I can just apply the foil back to it, and then I can do another cast in a different way. So we're going to go ahead and begin the process in the next video of working with MonsterClay here. Now, the MonsterClay will not inherently want to attach to the aluminum foil, so you do have to get that nice build up, nice film build up all the way across the structure. This is going to be a very thin, light layer of MonsterClay, and then we'll kind of build up some textures and branches along the way for the casting and the mold making process. Again, remember that this is the first portion of the Pardging Falcon. This is going to be the mold and the cast of the stump, and then we'll work into the actual bird itself, which is going to be quite large. Remember, we also put this with the aluminum foil onto the actual base plate so I can pick it up, I can carry it around, I can move it as I need to, and I can also lower it down by a few inches by removing the turntable. Of course, we can always put it on the turntable just so we can easily rotate that around and continuously work on it, right? So I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Just remember that the reason we use aluminum foil is because this is a temporary setup and this is a reusable structure for future projects, right? We spent the money, we built it, and it's going to be used multiple times throughout its life cycle. Alrighty, everybody, so let's go ahead and jump into some MonsterClay. Now, doesn't this thing look so shiny? Now, of course, we have the foam layered up and glued together with Gorilla Glue. Now, we went over it with a nice thin layer of aluminum foil. Now, of course, we used a little bit of that aluminum foil to build up some of that kind of like root textures where it's coming down and then going into the simulated dirt. Now, the dimensions of this base. Now, not including the wood structure that we're sitting in on top of, but we do have a 1 foot by 1 foot general kind of square base here. That's the dirt base. And then the bottom of the stump is going to be roughly about 9 inches in width. And the top of the stump is around maybe 7 to 8 to 9 inches in width there. So the diameter of the entire stump at the very top is around 7 or 8 inches. And then the base is around maybe 9 to 10 at the most. And then the very bottom dirt section is around a foot wide in general. Now, how tall is this bad boy? Now, this bad boy is around a foot tall. It goes actually just under a foot. I decided to make it 1 inch shorter. And then we do have some of those pieces of jagged, broke away wood textures at the very top of the stump. And we'll be using that just to kind of give it a little bit extra height and dimension as we're kind of detailing it out later on in the creation processes. And so here you can see I do have my MonsterClay. We were going to be using MonsterClay from Monster Maker Inc. For this project, and we're going to make a mold of this later on using latex. But we'll get to that more of that later in some of the upcoming videos. So just hang tight. Be aware that we're going through a lot of videos in this overall playlist for the Pardging Falcon, and the actual Gopher Frog kind of cascades into that a little bit as well. I'll mention that again later, I'm sure, but this is the crock pot that we have for our MonsterClay, and I usually use the crock pot features of warming the clay just as a means just to keep the clay warm after I microwave it. I found that out as I kind of tinkered with it, and I did create a video of me just like showcasing the fact that I did have a crock pot for my MonsterClay finally. It's just naturally progress for progress's sake here in the studio. And I did add that to my arsenal of tools and things that I utilize here in the studio. So as you can see, it is bone cold, and we're going to get this warmed up here, and then we can start actually sculpting with some of the MonsterClay onto the actual aluminum foil base that we've created. Now, I'm really happy with how the crock pot has turned out up to this point in time. And if you want to go back and check out that little small micro clip of the crock pot, and unboxing it and opening it, and me just describing verbally why I like the one I picked out, then you can go check that out. Now here we are, we're going to start to layer in some of this MonsterClay here. Now we're going to begin in a real-time version of me adding the clay on, and then as we get into the overall processes a little bit, we'll start to run into time-lapse. So we're going to start to speed up quite a bit here. Now, just be aware, guys, if you would like to go ahead and speed it up at this point even further than the 6x speed that we're about to roll into, you can, of course, use the YouTube built-in speed changer, and you can either slow it down or you can speed it up depending on what you're looking for, but it will distort the sound a little bit, so just be aware of that. So put me on mute, you can listen to it in the background if you want to increase the time even more into like a super time lapse. But we are going to be rolling into a 6x in just a few moments. Now the name of the game throughout this process is really just get some clay over the aluminum. Get everything fully covered. We can build up a little bit of the blocking in about where we would like some of the shape and the dimension of the stump to be during this stage, but it's more so just about applying the clay. Now right now I'm going to do it in a few different ways, so you can kind of just have fun and see how I apply it in different ways, different circumstances. So to start off with here, what I'm doing is I'm just applying little pieces of clay a little bit at a time, and I'm just going to kind of roll this out a little bit, and we're just taking a piece of clay, we're putting it on, we're just extending that existing clay that we're already using out even further. Now as we work down to the very bottom, you're going to start to see I'll use different techniques to get coverage a lot faster, but you'll see that here in just a few moments. I'm going to go ahead and keep pushing this into the aluminum foil. Sometimes you have to apply a little bit of extra pressure. Make sure that you push out any excess air between the clay and the aluminum foil, so that way you don't have any like bubbling with air underneath. You don't want any air pockets that are going to cause it to distort later or shift later on after you've already put some of the detail into it. Now just remember that the clay right now is substantially warm, and then as it cools off, it will become more solidified. But of course, it's always easier to apply warm clay into warm clay. So any of these pieces where I'm just adding on to, I'm trying to do that while it's all warm before it really solidifies. If you do it now while it's all warm, you don't really have to work very hard to blend out those lines. Even though we're going to detail it later, we still don't want to apply extra work to us or anything like that, because we're not willing to we're doing it in different sessions, and one piece is cold, one piece is hot, and we have a hard line between the two. Need to work harder to blend it. If you can do this warm on warm, I would recommend that. And if you can, apply all of the first layer in one session all the way through without stopping. I highly recommend you do that. It just makes it all one piece of clay, makes it blend a lot better. It gives you an overall stronger structure as well. Now, as of right now, you can see that it's super smooth. That's one great thing about MonsterClay is when you apply it, with gloves and still warm and malleable, it is super shiny and super smooth, and it's very easy to use. Don't worry, it will not stay that way, you guys. As we get into later stages of detail work for the stump here, it's really going to transform. We're going to apply a lot of definition and a lot of bark textures and splitting of the wood, things like that to this item. Now, as you can see here, I'm going to start to work the clay up and then over the top edge of that kind of like extra bark extension there. That's where like the bark didn't break free for whatever reason. Maybe the trees fell because it was decayed. That's what I'm at least thinking during this sculpting process, is that the tree fell because of decay. And we have these little pieces of bark that are very much so just sticking up and then away from the main body of the stump. And then we're gonna have a lot of decay and a lot of really rich brown dirts around there. But as of right now, it looks odd because it's just super smooth. That's what I'm trying to say. Pushing that up there. I don't want that clay to be super uber thick right there around the upper portions of those straggly bark textures. But I do want it to be very strong during the sculpting and casting processes. So although we're kind of stretching that clay up and then away, we want to make sure it has a lot of strength to it as well. Think about how, like, when you go to make the cast in the mold, how it's going to perform is very important. pushing that in there. Now, as you can see here, we are still in real time, you guys. I hope you enjoy this type of sculpting sometimes, guys. I know that these videos run pretty long, but I'm trying to make them very instructional. So if you want to use some of these techniques, or you're just looking for that one video that you just can't find on YouTube, like, you know, just layering in a lot of clay, or sculpting particular textures, or doing something. You know, it's like a lot of times I'll look for something on YouTube in like MonsterClay sculpting, or temporary sculpting here, like this is where you intend to go over it with latex, and I just can't find a whole lot of videos. I know they're out there, but I'm not finding a ton of them. So I'm hoping that I can fill that void in YouTube and just really give you some real-time videos of me sculpting here. But like I said, we were about to jump into a time lapse, so we're going to start to really speed things along through this sculpting process. And I'll probably sculpt 2 or 3 different ways throughout the process, just to give a lot of diversity and variation in the sculpting process, and allow you to see different ways. So you may see me do some sculpting in like a smooth texture, or applying like really random jagged textures, and we'll just see where it takes us. Trying to peel up that edge a little bit right there. I do plan to incorporate a little bit of a tapered edge around the entire top part of the stump, and we'll decay and trim that a little bit to make it look very jagged and used. All right, so here we are. We're going to start to work around the back side of this raised up bark texture here. And as we apply this, it's really going to kind of transform a little bit in the way it looks. Remember I said that we made the overall top portion of the stump a little bit shorter than we had originally been requested of. So we wanted it to be about 1 foot tall or so, and we decided to make it about 2 inches short so that we could have these raised edges on the very top. Although also 1 foot tall over the entire structure, it got a little bit too excessively long and tall, and it just felt so out of place. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue applying this thin layer of clay all the way around until we get just a nice full coverage here. So as I start to build up some of the details later on in the stages, you'll really see how things just transform, and how when I apply some of these higher levels, you kind of get to see the details pop out, and the overall stump textures really transform, right? But until you get to those higher levels of details, you really just have to rely on your mind's eye about how you want the overall end result to be. I want to have a perfect balance between nice rotting decay as well as nice fresh bark textures. And those bark textures are going to be very gray, right? So they'll have a gray tone, very dark and dingy. And then that way, when we put the Falcon on top of this item, it's really going to pop. And I'm hoping that the vibrancy of the colors and the blues of the plumage really just, it has a great contrast between the stump as well as the actual peregrine falcon. Here we are, just rolling that up and then over that top edge there, and then when we bring it in the details and the kind of bark textures up, and then what we'll do is we'll push that even further up, and the top portions of those will have a nice jagged bark texture. And then we'll also apply some splitting action, as if the bark is drying too fast, and it would like split and buckle and pop away from the actual underlying wood on the stump. Now at this point in the game, my clay is starting to harden up, and as you can see when I push on it, it's not really easy to get it out anymore. I only warmed it up for maybe like a minute or so, and of course the crock pot is completely full of clay. Now you're going to see the clay is going to slowly disappear as we work through this stump project, and there's not going to be very much left in my crock pot. So it almost takes, I would say, like maybe a quart and maybe 3/4 of a quart in total of clay to cover the entire stump textures here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and warm it up again, guys, and this time what we're going to do is we're going to start to enter into a time lapse here, and we're really going to start to blast through this project, you guys. Now just remember, as we enter into the time lapse, the name of the game for this portion of the project is just to go and get full coverage over the entire subject. So as I work my way down the stump, the name of the game is to make sure that the clay sticks to each other, and that keeps it from like peeling off at any stage during the sculpting process. Because the clay doesn't inherently want to attach to the aluminum foil, you need to make sure that it inherently attaches to other clay segments as you apply this on. When we get down to the dirt textures, I'll jump back in, guys, and I'll just give you a brief description of the way that we're going to apply it, and that will be in a Pardging method. So we'll be using the Pardging of like hot clay over the structure, and I'll use that on the sides as well, like here and there, to kind of get really good coverage. Because at some point, you know, just applying little small divots of clay just doesn't cut it, and you just got to really just throw it on there as hot as it is, and it gives you a lot faster coverage than what we're doing here. But I still want to show you all of the different techniques, you know, applying small medallions of clay, little rolls of clay here and there, and then breaking into like applying hot clay just with the hand, just to get really fast adhesion between the clay and the aluminum structure. The faster you can put the clay on, the faster you can get the details locked in and start building up those fun layers and details. So right now I am going to go ahead and push some clay into this little like cavern right here. Now this is where the gopher frog, the Carolina gopher frog, is going to be positioned. Now of course the Carolina gopher frog is more central to, like, say, North Carolina and down this way, as opposed to, say, Canada where the commissioner is at. However, you can kind of partake or take that frog's overall anatomy and kind of apply it to a lot of different frogs in general. And I thought it would be kind of cool to apply some type of like prey or other creature or animal into the diorama in some way. And we'll kind of hide this away with like different flocking and elements throughout the process. If anything else, the like kind of cavern area around the bottom of the stump is just going to give us an area of decay and extra element of like design to it, instead of just having it just straight up and down on all sides. It's going to allow us to get different like bark techniques and decay, and add some extra flocking in there and some grass textures and stuff like that. And then the frog is just supposed to be just a fun little addition to the overall diorama, just something fun. And that will be for the commissioner. A little surprise. Of course, they'll probably know about it because I'm releasing the videos, so it's not a true surprise like just out of the box. But the fact that I'm adding just extra little details here and there that just up the level of the overall sculpture is just pretty cool. So here I am, just in a zoomed out method. I don't do this very often. How often do I show myself on camera at this angle? I know I like to put you right up against my subject that I'm usually working on, just so you can get as much detail as you can and get as much out of the video and the content as you're able to. But here I am, just removing small pieces of clay here around from the exterior of that hot clay, waiting for that to cool off just a little bit so I can get my fingers in there. And we're just going to continuously add clay all the way around all the aluminum structure here. Just applying that there around the entire thing. And this is a little bit before we're actually doing the Pardging method here. And that's what we're going to do now. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking a hot clay, and sometimes I'll take a piece of solidified clay around from the exterior edges of the crock pot here. I will dip it into the boiling, well, I wouldn't say boiling, but it's very hot clay. I'm even filling it through the latex gloves that I'm wearing here. And what I'll do is I'll dip it into that hot clay, and I'll use it as, say, like a paintbrush or like a sponge. And I'm using that hot clay to really quickly paint on clay onto the subject here. It's an extremely fast way of really getting clay onto the subject, but it does cause a mess. It's quite messy. It also allows me to really push clay into that bottom rim around the bottom of the actual diorama base, and we get a good full coverage over all of that, even underneath that. And that allows us to get a full coverage, so that when we come in and cast it later with the latex, we get full coverage over that lower portion as well. Now, we're not doing a whole lot of texturing at this point. We're really just applying the clay very quickly and getting it on the subject. We're blocking it in. We're still getting full coverage and blocking in here. So sit back and enjoy as we continue this Pardging method. So you can really see here how fast it really goes. Now, of course, we are in a 6x time lapse here just to kind of expedite the overall video content a little bit. But as you can see, just using just the solid piece of clay, or just a warmed up little ball of clay, dipping it into that liquid and then just smoothing this on in the Pardging method is just so much faster than just applying little dollops here and there and then just pushing them down and blending them. And what I really love about this process is because I'm using it kind of almost like a little sponge or a paintbrush, as it were, it's applying a lot of detail and a lot of levels of variety to the depth of the simulated dirt that we're going to be working with on that layer. Now, of course, it does allow us to get really fast coverage in a very thin manner. So we don't want the clay to be overly thick, because we don't want to add a bunch of like overly. I don't want it to be super thick. Like the stump is the overall size I kind of like. So all we're using this for is really just to detail the upper layers of where we want those details of the bark and the dirt textures to be. We don't want to build up like an inch of clay over this. There's no point in that. We just don't need that much, and it would just make the stump overly big, and we don't want it to be overly big. We want it to be just nice and proportional to what it's supposed to look like. So we're just kind of pushing this onto the exterior of the aluminum foil there, just painting that on here and there. And then of course I do have to come back and do some patch up work here and there, but that's neither here nor there. It's super easy, it's super simplistic, and it's not very difficult at all. And like I said, when we get down to the very bottom there, as you can see, when we were applying that, I really am getting a great variety of like dirt textures, and I'm really happy with how it looks so far. Using just my hand here, dipping it into the hot clay, and then just kind of just wiping it on. I'm getting a lot of excess slurry spray onto the sides of the crock pot there. There's no problem with that. I'll actually push that down as we run through the process and I start to clean everything up. And so we're just kind of just pushing this on, just wet as could be, and just letting it smear onto all the nooks and crannies. If I find a place I didn't go over it enough, or I have some like aluminum foil shining through, then I will go over that again with this process here. Alrighty, so I am going to go ahead and do that same thing to the very top of the stump there, and then we're going to begin sculpting in a little bit here. Now, I'm going to do the dirt in two different ways. The first way is we applied the clay, and then we went ahead and used the very, very melted down clay version, and we just brushed it on, and it left a ton of detail and a lot of variety of levels of potential dirt behind. The second way here is I'm actually just using the sculpting tool here, as well as the heat gun, and I'm reactivating and warming up that clay, and I'm smoothing it out with these sculpting tools here. These are just metal sculpting tools, and I'm just smoothing it out quite a bit with my finger as well as the tools. And naturally, this is what you would do if you were kind of wanting a smooth surface. You would put the clay on, and then you would heat it up, and you would just kind of smooth it out a little bit at a time until you're just happy with the overall textures. Now, because I wanted to build up dirt layers and levels on this that I can actually put flocking and things like that on later, we want to make sure that we have a lot of variety and levels to the dirt texture. And as we work into later process of maybe sculpting the dirt transition into the root system or the bottom of the stump, and we define that line of dirt, of course it's going to transform the way it looks a little bit. Right now it just looks like the dirt area we have now just goes straight up into the stump. So it just feels out of sorts, and it makes it feel like it's all just one lumped in piece of clay. But what I'm thinking here is that I wanted to show you how you can easily smooth out the clay, and then if you wanted to bring in other layers of clay on top of this yet again, then you could do so, but you would already have that smoothed out textured base to build up on top of. And it doesn't matter which way you go with it. I truly honestly believe that for this type of dirt texture that I'm trying to achieve here, doing the Pardging method and just leaving all of those beautiful detailed layers of clay in different directions and different textures, kind of stippled on there. On the left hand side, you can see how it just has a lot of variety. And on the right hand side, when I'm working with the clay, it's smoothing it out. I'm able to really define the overall kind of even ripples of where the dirt would be, or where I may potentially put some rock textures. But it's just two different styles. One is smoothing it out, then building up some more detail and layers. The other way is to leave it rough and kind of rocky and random, and then build up layers on top of that. So I like it both ways, but I do find that it's sometimes just easier just to leave it rough and ragged as opposed to smoothing it out. It also keeps it a little bit more organic feeling than it will be when you just always have to smooth things out, if that makes any sense. But you can really definitely see the difference between the two areas here. And then of course when we get done with everything, we won't be able to tell the difference between smoothed out, extremely detailed, and the rough portions of the clay here. So overall, I'm pretty happy with how it's turning out so far. I was also thinking about smoothing out the lower portions of the root textures as they come down the trunk, and I decided to kind of leave that as it is as well. When we come in with some bark textures later on in this process, you'll see that it really wouldn't matter anyways, because those bark textures are really going to get pushed into the clay and give us a lot of variation in bark texture. So it's not really necessarily to smooth out those layers before you apply those textures. It's just wasted movements, and you just don't really have to do that. So we're just going to continue around the base of the dirt texture here, just kind of shaping it up. I'll be cutting away that lower, kind of like a tapered lip of clay, cleaning that edge up quite a bit, as well as smoothing and adding different layers to this base before I go back up to the stump and start working on it. It's kind of a back and forth motion until I just get happy with the overall anatomy of the dirt, layers on top of the root structure, as well as the bark texture on the sides of the stump. So sit back and enjoy, guys, as we smooth out some of this clay and build up some textures. Alright, so with that completely done there, we're going to start to move on to the actual bark textures around the exterior of the stump here. Now, originally when I was trying to put these stump textures in here, I decided to use just a very light grain of bark. And now these are hickory bark segments that I had taken from the ecosystem around my house. Now, although there are, of course, so many different subspecies of hickory, we're just going to go with just a generic like wood grain texture here. A nice bark texture, something that I can reuse in the future for other projects as I get to those projects. So for instance, I could always paint this out in a different shade or different color, but we're going to go with a light gray to a dark gray to dinged out decay for this stump as we get in the detail process. However, we want to make sure that we're able to lock some of this in. So originally I started off with these very light layers of textures. Now these are all real bark woods that I had actually collected from the ecosystem around my property and around where I usually tread. And I dried these out, whether air dry or I kiln oven bake them at a low temperature so that they're free of debris and bugs and little critters and things like that. And then it creates a nice piece of wood texture that I can use to impression. And that's what we're doing here, is we're going to impression the overall bark texture all the way up the exterior of the item here. Again, like I said, I originally started off with these very shallow bark textures, and it was working. It was doing pretty good, but it wasn't giving me the look that I wanted. So I ended up doing this light layer of bark texture all the way around the exterior of the stump. And then I let it sit for quite a few days, and I just looked at it. So all I did is I just sat back, I did some other projects, I looked at it, and it wasn't sitting well with me. I just felt like it was missing stuff. I felt like it was incomplete. Yeah, it had the bark texture. It's working great. It's giving it good texture, but I felt like something was missing. Now, it could have been that the very top portion where I'm kind of applying downward pressure is not completed out yet. Maybe because that's super smooth and it's not like textured, it just feels incomplete, and my mind's eye is not really envisioning the exterior completely finished out. I also have a lot of variety in textures around the outside edges of the stump. Remember, I said it's going to be partially decayed, so some of those pieces of bark maybe like kind of like buckled out or moved in particular ways or dried out, and we want to make sure we're able to catch some of that. So some of the little areas between these bark textures will be kind of like cut out and cut away with a Dremel or something like that, and then those will be like little voids of decay. We'll get to that later. It's no big deal. So we want to make sure we have a wide variety of different textures here. Now, eventually, I get to the point where like I'm like, well, I need something deeper. Like it has to go deeper than these little shallow pieces of stump wood texture is giving me. So I decided to go out in my local ecosystem again, and I actually found a much deeper grain and a larger tree. So some of these pieces that I'm using now are from like just smaller trees, just like small segments. I decided to go with a bigger grain of tree. So I'm not sure what the gauge of the tree was that I removed that from. I believe that it was probably over a foot wide. So they were substantially larger than what we have now. And when I say substantial, I mean like as far as width of the tree, maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5 inches wider than what I have here, right? So like proportionally, those stump textures and those wood textures are almost there, but they may be a little bit deeper grained than what you would find on a tree this realistic size. Blending out some of those seam lines, sometimes when you roll a piece of that bark texture there, it leaves like a straight edge either on the top or the bottom or on the sides, depending on how you roll those out. The most important thing here I'm trying to do is make sure I blend out those hard edges so they just don't exist, they don't draw the eye. Because if I wait to do it later, I may forget, and then I just have a hard line on the outside of the stump structure all the time, and I'll always have to fix that one little area with a Dremel or something similar. So I need to make sure that I kind of blend out as many of those as I can. I also came in and decided to start texturing the very top of it. Maybe I thought to myself, well, maybe if I go ahead and texture the top of it, then maybe it'll start to look right all the way around, and I'll start to get happy with it. And this in fact does allow me to become more happy with the overall structure. It made it feel more complete. And what I'm doing here is I'm using the existing bark textures and I'm pushing down, but not just that, I'm using the sides of the bark texture, the very jagged, torn edge effect, and I'm pushing down on these higher raised edges of where I simulated the bark to be kind of coming up and shooting over the top of the stump. Now this is just the first layer of texture across the top of the stump. Don't worry, we're going to get to more. But this is just the first step in that process, is just getting some general texture on the top of it. Alright, you guys, so as we continue to texture the top of the stump here, just remember that we're just using the existing bark textures that we already have, and as long as we use them in just a random fashion, we really don't have to worry about applying the actual bark texture of that to the top of the stump. More so, you want to just create like a overall texture that could be used to give the underbearing of, say, dirt or maybe some debris, or maybe like a rough break where the tree had fallen down because of decay. That's why I did a slope taper from the interior of the rings of the wood on the top and the upper edges of those raised bark textures. Now, the easiest way to give these little cracks here, now in the upper left hand corner, just briefly, I'm going to show you, here is the AI generated image that me and the commissioner had spoke of for the stump that the peregrine falcon is going to be standing on top of. Now, as you can see, we have some cracks here, and we really fell in love with these cracks, and I really wanted to make sure that I could portray those in the overall diorama. Now, of course, you can sculpt individual rings into this type of stump, but in reality, if it wasn't a clean cut, those rings would not necessarily be super visible. If anything, you would have just like a kind of like a random effect of breakage and a stippling, uneven texture. But those cracks to the exterior edges, if it was drying out in the summer, it would also be cracking. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a cracking effect by using that X-Acto knife just to kind of pull some clay away, revealing the underneath aluminum foil. So that way when we go into the casting process, we will have cracks all the way around the top of the diorama here. Now, just remember, we don't have to go super extremely crazy with these cracks. Only 3 or 4 of the large ones will do. And what we're going to do, instead of making rings, which is actually just really easy to do, but it would just look very off-putting. That's not how it would look in nature if it was a decayed top of a natural piece of wood, unless it was cut with a chainsaw. Of course, the chainsaw would give you a clean cut. We don't want that clean cut in this type of project. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the X-Acto knife here. We're going to just apply striations and cut lines of very random fashions to the interior of the ring of wood. Now, if we want to use like different layers of paint to create rings, then we can do that. We can definitely do that. That'll be no problem at all. But we want to make sure that we incorporate different levels to give that decay and dried wood effect. So we're going to also continue this up into the raised portions of the bark texture there, removing pieces here and there. And then what we'll do is we'll kind of detail the tops of those raised bark textures again before we do final effects. Alright, so we're going to continue using these small cut striations from whether it's the outside to the interior pinpoint or the interior pinpoint to the exterior. Now, let me know in the description below, do you think that this looks adequate? Or just hang tight till the very end and let me know what you think, because I'm kind of interested to see what other people or other sculptors out there think about this process. Do you agree with me not putting rings in right away when we know that we're going to go over it with dirt flockings and different browns and washes to create those kind of ring effects in the painting and dyeing process? Or do you think I should have went ahead and sculpted those rings instead of giving it a split type of wood texture? I'm interested to see what you think. Let me know in the description below. How would you have done the top of the stump textures? I'm also going to take some extra clay here and I'm going to start to build up the seam line between the dirt foundation and the edges of the stump foundation. Now remember, because of the size of the stump, we don't need a lot of variation in taper between the bottom of the stump and the very top. A little bit of taper just naturally makes the eye feel good when it looks at it, but we want to make sure that we make it look like the bottom of the root or stump texture is going into the dirt below. To do that, we're not going to make a super hard seam line between the two. Whatever happens, it needs to be kind of subtle, and it needs to be noticeable to the viewer of the sculpture, but I also don't want it to be super harsh and so much abrasive underneath that I can't go over it with dirt or grasses or flockings, because it's so leveled up and so like bulked out that I can't go over it with stuff later. I want to leave room for like interpretation as I see fit. But I'm also always thinking throughout this entire process, what will it look like if I have this just bleached out as stone or plaster? Like, how would this look like if it was just white? Just pure white, nothing else. And how would it look if I just portrayed this as a sculpture? And so I'm also thinking about that, because who knows, maybe I'll just make a gypsum cast of this and enter it into some competitions. You never know. And this is just the first half of the overall Peregrine Falcon sculpture, right? The stump is just the first half. The second half is the showpiece. This is just the stand that the Peregrine Falcon is going to stand on. So this is just part of the project. And I want it to look good, though. I mean, although the stump is not going to be the centerpiece of the overall piece of artwork, I still want it to look good. And so what we're doing here is we're just building up textures around the base where it goes into the dirt. And we're going to go ahead and make sure that the seam line is visible, but at the same time not too overpowering. Okay? Alright guys, so let's just briefly talk about the sculpting tool that I'm using here. Now this is just a small flat bladed tool. It has a tapered end on it and it's just flat. I like it because it's kind of like a little bit of a shovel or like a little bit of a hoe. I can easily just scrape up clay, small or large little clobs of it, and I can use it to push it into position. Then I can just use my finger to just kind of tamper the clay down, and then I just use this to kind of give it some detail and some smoothed out lines, right? Because if I don't want that to be a stone, it needs to be blended in slightly, so that way when I go over it with those flockings later, it's not too obvious and too rocky, right? So we're using this small tool to apply the layers as we see fit here in particular ways, and because of the turntable that we have, I'm able to quickly rotate it around and say work on another side, then rotate it back around to the other side and see if I like how it looks as I'm rotating it. And anytime I find a place where I feel like I can improve, then I'll do so. But then eventually you get to a point where you're just like, I kind of like how it looks, you know, kind of happy with it, don't think I can improve it any. And then we just move on to the next step. Now I'm going to use a little bit of aluminum foil here just to kind of like, not really say blend the edges of what I've added, but just to apply a little bit of texture to it. Not a whole lot, just a little bit. We're just mainly getting rid of any fingerprints and any smooth textures. Get rid of those smooth textures. Now here you can see we have a really great taper at the very top of the stump. Look how great this looks, guys. Now as I spoke of earlier, I asked you to leave it in the description below. How would you have done this differently? As you can see, I did come in with some thicker gauges of bark, and all it is just it's more older bark textures on an older tree, and I used those the exact same way I did the thin ones, but it's just a lot more pressure applied to it. Now, I'll also use a heat gun to accelerate the heating of the outside edges of the clay in sheets. So I'll do one whole side at a time, or one particular time at a time. I'll heat it up with the heat gun until I just start to see it getting malleable and melted, and then I'll apply those details. Once it solidifies, it's really hard to get those details to lock in, but you can also smooth a little bit of those details out. So if you're getting kind of like hard edges or lines, because of the stump textures or the bark textures you're using to apply those details, then you can blend those out with some silicone tip tools. But look at the detail work that we have from the bottom all the way up to the top. You can really see now the depth of the bark, and that's what I'm looking for. Now around the bottom you can see that we do have a few pieces of rock. I've intentionally made those visible to where they're kind of sticking out from underneath of the stump textures here. We also have that little concave little hole there. When we come in later on down the road with other layers of detail, that little area is going to become much more intricate. So just be aware that that's going to transform quite a bit as we get into those stages. But right now it just looks kind of raw and unfinished. But if anything, we will be working on that later on down the road in other videos. Here's all of that existing dirt texture that we had made with the pardging of the hot clay off of our gloves, which is pretty cool. We didn't have to work very hard at all. And remember, we did clean up the bottom edge around the aluminum foil also. We used an X-Acto knife just to kind of trim that up a little bit, make it a little bit more clean looking, because remember, this is going to be a professionally crafted, sculpted diorama. And now look at the bark textures here and all the taper. It's really looking great. We're having an amazing item here. And I really try to focus a little bit of those thicker gauges of dirt around where the root stumps would be, the root texture would be going down into the dirt. Now look at the cracks around the top of the stump here. I'm really digging this. As I spoke of earlier, that is the look that we were going for. Here's that image in the upper left-hand corner again. As you can see, we got the overall effect of the cracking stump that we were looking for. What do you think, guys? I really am impressed with the overall sculpt work on this item. It's taken about a week or so for me to really lock everything down, and I did let it sit for a few days between sessions of working on the stump textures, just to make sure that I liked how it overall looked. In the upcoming videos, we're going to be using latex to make a master mold of this, as well as probably a gypsum cast shell to go over that, just to give it a little bit of strength. I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Make sure you like and subscribe, and I will catch you on the next video.